Hello, and I'm very excited to be talking to you guys tonight. I'm going to ask for everyone to take off their camera, and then we'll have time for questions throughout the evening. And at the end, if you want, we can all put back our cameras and such. So tonight, we're going to be talking about consciousness, archetypes, and karma from a Vedic lens, since you guys are in an Ayurvedic class. And I'm Dr. Frances Yahia, and I co-own Hidden Truths College of Metaphysics with Miss Miller. So Emmeline, I'm just going to ask everyone to take off their cameras, and then later on in the evening we can put those on. So before we start, I just want to take a moment of silence to just connect to our hearts and our mind and our souls. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And the messages and the information that's intended for everyone to come through this evening, that you receive it, whatever serves, may it enter, and whatever is not necessary, may it wash away. Thank you. So there's going to be a lot of content tonight, and this will be available for you guys after to re-listen, and of course questions throughout the evening. And just make your notes, and I'll stop at certain points and explain. It's a lot of content. I'm not expecting everyone, and everyone's at, I'm assuming, different levels of knowledge and education about the Vedas and the texts and spirituality and such. So please ask any question, and I will hopefully be able to answer and help you on your journey. So let's start with the course objectives. Tonight, I really would like for you to walk away with some understanding between supreme consciousness and then your individual or personal consciousness. We're going to cover the concept of the Trimurti, which is the Hindu Trinity. I'm going to explain the concept of the mind and how it's associated with the Trimurti. We're going to talk about fire, which is the element of burning karma, and talk about karma and choice and free will, and why we use this element of fire to raise consciousness. And then to understand how this inner world and inner work of raising consciousness relates to your external life, problems, conflicts, and the world that you create. So I start every lecture off with a universal law. If you're not familiar, there are 8 primary universal laws. And the one that we're really working with this evening is the principle of mentalism. In a nutshell, the law states all is mind. Basically, everything that we're experiencing is a construct and the reality from our state of mind, our state of consciousness. We're going to be talking about an energy field that surrounds you, that's created through your mind. And it's what's close to home, what becomes the reality that you live, whether they're conflicts or situations, they're created by that mind. That's an energy field that we'll talk about momentarily. The world that you create, the one you experience, is a product of your thoughts. Thoughts, and we'll go into this a little bit deeper, are the most subtle form. So when we think of a cup or we think of a pen, there's obvious form, density, but thoughts are actually the most subtle form that exists. And that's what creates our reality that then becomes the life that you experience. Materialization of these thought forms create the life that you live, that you experience, and belief change equals life change. So we will go in depth to each of these this evening. So let's start with the teachings of the path. And we start with the sacred text. Where do we get this information from? And I will be using the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita and the text link to the teachings that we'll be exploring this evening. So I want to start off with a sutra from the Bhagavad Gita. It's 70:13-23. And we're going to break this down, but I really want to spend a moment here so you understand the rest of the evening is breaking down this particular sutra. He who knows the Purusha, and the Purusha we're going to see in a moment, and Prakriti, along with the gunas, whatever be his state of evolution, he shall never be born again. So in a moment, we're going to be talking about supreme consciousness as Purusha and Prakriti, which you might have already started to cover in Sankhya philosophy, and the gunas. And we're talking about the Mahagunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And then we're going to talk about the state of evolution, the world in which you live. If you think of the caste system in India, if you think of consciousness level and the people in your own life, this is what we're referring to. So this is going to be the guiding sutra that we're going to use throughout the evening. So let's begin with supreme and individual consciousness, the beginning, the origins of all. So the supreme consciousness, and the law of mentalism is tricky because it's very, very difficult to understand that everything we're living in is an illusion, that it's just created from our mind and our state of consciousness. But buy into that for a moment so that we can sort of start deconstructing the world and our thoughts and so forth. So supreme consciousness, and the key word here is unmanifest. So unfortunately, I have to put an image because if not, the slide would be blank. So imagine this is the surrounding of everything, and everything is encompassed in this larger energy field. However, it is unmanifest. Unlike what I said before about the pen or the cup, it has no form. There is no form. However, all things exist within this undifferentiated consciousness. There's no field per se, but all things that could possibly exist in a manifest world exist currently in this consciousness. So this is known as Brahman or Purusha. And you might have seen this, like I said before, with your Sankhya philosophy. And it is beyond qualities. Qualities like form or the 20 gunas, the dense, hard, soft, wet, cold, etc., are representative of a manifest world. We are not in that place yet. We're in something that is unmanifest, that has absolutely no form. There's nothing differentiated. There's no distinguishing factor. All things exist and are contained in this Purusha or this cosmic mind. So existence is included in this. Consciousness is included in this. Good, evil, light, dark. Anything that once separate, which we'll see in a moment, creates a quality, a guna, a separation, a manifestation, a form, is what you as a human being would decipher as a quality, good, bad, or a column, or some sort of name. So this idea that this is unmanifest is where all things emerge. And then there is the manifest mind. That's what we're talking about today. The goal is to have these be as most relational and similar, if you will, as possible. And that's the function of this evening, is to speak to how that can occur. That you manifest with your mind that is manifest, that it has form and thought, could be as close as possible to this Purusha or this Brahman that has no form whatsoever, that is supreme consciousness. That, in essence, is the goal. So it's known as Prakriti It's many names. It is consciousness as form. And what I need you to understand here is that there is a field that is created, and you'll see that in another diagram. This is now a field. So imagine something that is surrounding, that has a boundary, that has a barrier, whether you could see it or not. So now all those qualities of good, of bad, of light and dark now have a container. There's a container where they now exist. And this becomes the first polarity. So that universal law of mentalism, upon conception, the moment you are conceived, becomes the first polarity: masculine, feminine, light, dark, good, bad. And our job is to unify our dual consciousness within our dual life of our mind, body, spirit container, and live as close as possible to this Purusha that has no differentiation. That's the task of our lifetimes. So Prakriti is the first form, albeit subtle. This is what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of the archetypes. Okay, so the archetypes are thought patterns, and you are creating your world pretty much rooted in one major archetype. There are others, and we'll talk about how to start integrating all of them so that you can get closer to Purusha in your form. But it's important that we recognize that this is a separation, or an apparent separation, that our mind creates, and it makes us feel separate from this supreme consciousness. And that's part of the objective, is to eliminate that differentiation so that we can go back to a state of supreme consciousness, of undifferentiation, however, within our dual nature in our body. So it's a big task. So Edgar Allan Poe said, all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. So Prakriti is the thought form, or this energy field. And within that, we create, and we'll go into how, with the Trimurti, the aspects of the mind, the gunas, the archetypes, we create a dream within that dream already. So this being separate from the original supreme consciousness that is undifferentiated already makes us feel separate from that moment that we are conceived. What happens at the moment of conception? This supreme consciousness, divinity, cosmic mind, the universe, God, whatever you feel comfortable. And now through the conception of the union of mother and father, you're conceived. But at that moment right here, nobody owns you. You're in limbo, what we call a liminal space. You're neither divine nor materialized. You're just sort of in an archetype thought form, the potential of what can be. I like to think of this as a God or the universe asked a question, and your life, as we continue down the manifestation to life and the choices and how you live your life, is the answer to that question. But that question is a void. There is nothing there that's claiming, owning you. And that space is very scary for us as humans. We like certainty. We like right and wrong answers. We like black and white columns. We don't like this gray liminal space of what may be. However, full union in the body, connected to that space of supreme consciousness that's undifferentiated, takes us back to a feeling internally that feels like this. Nobody sort of owns me. There's no validation. There's no concretization of anything. And that's a really scary space. And life is about entering those spaces and making choices so that the life that we live is indeed in response to a cosmic consciousness question, or the reason or the purpose of your being. So it's a scary call to action, but it's doable. And the sages have written about this, and tonight we're going to scratch the surface. So there's one consciousness now from Purusha and Prakriti. You and your individual consciousness from conception emerges. So you are part of the manifest consciousness of Prakriti, and your life will answer that particular question. And like I said before, the goal is that as Prakriti in our body, in our thoughts, in our choices, our life represents what we choose, is as close as possible to Purusha as possible. That's the call to action. So we'll call spirit Purusha, no consciousness differentiation. We'll call matter the beginning of matter. Remember, it's not form that you can touch yet with the elements. That comes later. But this is the first thought form. It's a separation from, or a feeling that it's separate from. And you emerge, your individual consciousness, your mind, from this state of Prakriti. So consciousness, your particular state of consciousness, is simply a reflection of your spirit and your matter. So it's what you have access to in your particular field. And there is a law called the law of correspondence. The law of correspondence, most of you might have heard, as within, so without, as above, so below. That's what this speaks to. We're going to talk a little bit later on about the archetypes, and specifically planetary archetypes from astrology, Vedic astrology, as mirrors to what's happening within. And later at the end of the night, we're going to talk about how to start integrating, because that's the key, is to integrate all of these aspects that appear to be separate from you, but are just correspondences to what's going on inside, but they're outside of the field. So please understand that this individual consciousness creates what I call a sphere of consciousness. That is where you live in your world. And all things that enter are there as access that you have in your field, even though they may appear outside of you. And it's information that comes in to give you guidance as to what's to integrate next, or what your next sort of spiritual lesson is. In your individual consciousness, your thoughts, archetypes, and now images, and we're going to do an exercise with some images, that then become words, that then become your choices, are all included here. So we've got beliefs as thoughts that are triggered from archetypes, that then become your choices, that then become your behavior, that then become the life that you've lived and you've chosen. And this is all included in your individual consciousness. This field is yours. It is individualized, but everything that existed in Prakriti and everything that existed in Purusha that we didn't have form are all there. So it's one consciousness. We're just a portion of the larger form and the largest undifferentiated with no form. So it is Prakriti that needs to be refined. That's here, viewing the way we view the world, our thoughts, and evolved, raising consciousness, to become a perfect reflection to the Purusha. That alone is liberation. And the goal is moksha. Moksha means liberation. And liberation from what? From samsara, from coming back over and over and over and eliminating rebirths. So I'm going to just bring you back to the Gita. Whatever be his state of evolution, he shall never be born again. And this is the goal, that Purusha and Prakriti are refined, that they're as close as possible through the gunas that we're going to talk about now. Does not matter your level of consciousness when you entered. into the lifetime. The caste, your financial status, none of that matters. It is accessible to everybody. And with that refinement, will have liberation or moksha, which will stop the reincarnation process. So obviously this evening, we're going to talk about karma, which has a lot to do with this, because until all karma is burned, that cycle of samsara does not stop, and we continue reincarnating. So our first activity, and this is not formal, but take out a piece of paper and draw a circle. And I want you to put you in the middle. You are in the middle, and this entire circle is your field. Anything that happens outside of the circle, you consider to be other, an other person, your partner, your children, your friends, your pets, it doesn't matter. Anything that's ancestral and the transcendent, meaning whatever you consider transcendent or numinous or divine. So this container is you. It has a boundary and is your sphere of consciousness. Everything within that is created from your thoughts. The external as well. That was what I was saying about the law of correspondence. But it's important to situate ourselves and anchor ourselves into time and place here. Any questions so far? Okay. This activity, we're going to do 3 more things or 4 more things with it. So just keep it by your desk. And I'm going to keep adding and adding and adding to it. So we're going to talk about the Trimurti and the Mahagunas. So now we are in the individual consciousness. Let me just bring you back. We're here, okay? So even though it's a portion of the larger consciousness, now we're in what represents you. So what are the Mahagunas? They are universal energies that are present in every fabric of the universe and influence our psychological, emotional, and energetic attributes. This does not have form. Everything that fills in that container, in that field, is related to your individual consciousness that is linked to these universal energies. These are primal building blocks. We're going to build on these momentarily, of manifestation. Themselves are prakriti. So now from this section, this prakriti that is form, although you can't see it, it's just energy, your individual consciousness comes, and from there, the Trimurti appears. This is Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva, if you know them as the gods. They represent sattva, purity, rajas, action, and tamas, inertia, if you've covered the Mahagunas in class. And they're on top of that related to the 3 states of mind. What is conscious, you can see that we're here tonight, we're conscious of this lecture, of this time and space. What is subconscious, what is happening underneath, perhaps motivating, triggering, emotional. And superconscious is the combination or the unification of both. And we're going to talk about the 3 related to karma and choice. So here's an image of the Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is considered the creator. Vishnu is considered the balancer. And Shiva is considered the destroyer. Again, these are aspects of our mind. So Shiva as the destroyer is oftentimes associated with tamas, because what destroys us, if you will, is our inability to access subconscious information, emotional states, things that are so suppressed in the unconscious that we're acting remotely or we're triggered emotionally and we react, sort of reptilian fight or flight brain. And this is what destroys us. So this is one aspect. The conscious mind is rajas, our choice, that fire, that activity. And then it's the unification of, if we know what is conscious that we are creating because of an unconscious or a subconscious presence, then we can achieve a superconscious or a sattvic purity or calmness, peace of mind. So we're going to talk more about those. So let's talk a little bit about the sacred texts where we get the information from. And one of the texts of the Vedas are the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, it says that from the form of consciousness, Prakriti, 3 forms arise. One of the things that you will see throughout spirituality is 1 goes to 3, goes to 7. You'll see this sort of pattern repeatedly in many different traditions. And so this is one way. So from the form of consciousness, Prakriti, 3, the Trimurti, emerge. The Trimurti are the trinity of supreme divinity in Hinduism, in which the cosmic functions of creation, preservation, and destruction are personified as a triad of deities. Remember, these are thought forms. These are parts of our psyche. There is no form yet. So one of the ways that humans can understand the universal consciousness or their own mind is through myth, is through symbol. And so seeing 3 very distinct versions of thought allows you to connect and start to develop a form. There's a concept in Hinduism called the Ishvadevatar, where we use it as God as form. One of the reasons that we have the symbol of Om, or a statue of Buddha, or a statue of one of the gods, is so that we can connect to the properties of that God and recognize that those, both light and dark, exist within us. But I really need to stress that we are nowhere near the form right now. The thought is the first form. Archetypes are the first form. That's the focus of tonight, but we'll bring it into the life that you create towards the end. So it's represented by a triangle, 3 aspects of the whole. Thought is division. Thought is the illusion of separateness. So when you're conceived, which is when you get your thought, you don't know anything yet, you're not materialized. That thought that you get at the moment of conception that's created here makes you feel separate from others, makes you believe that that field that hasn't even become your body yet, that is your life, makes an other appear. There is no other. That's the concept of the principle of mentalism. But because we have to live with a boundary, we think that there is a separation between our coworkers, our parents, our friends, and there isn't. The separation is thought. And that occurs at the moment of conception, where Prakriti separates appearingly from Purusha. Thought is the illusion of separateness. So when you feel separate from your partner, separate from a coworker, separate from another, a judgment, something that dissatisfies you, that's distasteful, a betrayal, it is rooted in thought. And tonight we're going to go all the way up to that so that you can recognize that it's your thought that is creating the illusion of separateness, the illusion of an other. But there is no such thing. This world is a world of illusion because it is rooted in thought, in that primary moment of conception where this Trimurti is created. Any questions? Very, very important concept. So the Upanishad states one's own thought is one's world. What a person thinks is what he becomes. And that's the intention for tonight. So going back to that circle that you're in the middle of, that boundary, that energy field, is simply one thought. One thought is what rides all of this. Now, we're going to talk later about some archetypes that emerge from a thought, because we have to integrate the pieces. This is the first sort of distinction, that there's three, and then we're going to layer on additional layers. But if we bring this all the way upstream to that moment of conception, where Purusha and Prakriti seemingly separate, and Prakriti seemingly creates you individual, and these three aspects of mind, you'll realize it's just one thought. So the Padma Purana says that the origin of the three modalities, the Mahagunas, are literally one supreme being. The devout should draw no distinction between them. This is the first explicit statement of the three gods' essential oneness as constituents of the supreme principle. So now we have the appearing separation of the Trimurti from the Prakriti, from that supreme principle of Purusha. We are not separate from that universal consciousness. We have never been separate, and we will never be separate. It is our thoughts that we think keep us separate from other and from that. So thoughts are the first things. The first thing to have any form is a thought. Therefore, anything in your circle, in your life, in your car, on your body, in your relationships, are simply thoughts that have materialized. And so you have a choice. There's a certain balance, if you will, of the creating thoughts, the destroying thoughts, and the preserving thoughts. And this combination, or whichever you sort of move forth in the world with primarily, creates your life and creates an illusion and a separateness to others. But the circle is your field, your initial conditions of conception, your conflicts that will become your life, and we'll talk about that in karma, and your thoughts. This is all you. There is no other. So this is the premise of why we're not victims. And we're going to talk about karma and what we chose when we incarnated. But it's very important that we understand that we are creating the world we're in. We are creating our conflicts. We are creating our problems from this belief that thoughts are separate, that we are separate from others in the universal consciousness, and it's all rooted in thoughts. So we have, as I said before, three parts of a whole. Our conscious mind is what you know. Your subconscious is what you do not know, you think you know, and why we need the external or the other to influence and inform. That's how we have growth. And hence, Shiva is the destroyer, and he's down here as tamas, because if we don't break down those beliefs or those subconscious suppressed thoughts that are stored in our subconscious, that they're shadow aspects of self, then our life is indeed just inertia. It's very tamasic. And so that's why Shiva is the destroyer in that respect. He destroys the illusion of what we think we know so that we can get to the root of who we really are. And we'll talk about animal nature later. Your conscious mind, your rajasic mind, your choices, I'm choosing to be here tonight, you chose to eat something for lunch, is linked to the conscious mind, Rajas, and Brahma. And then your Vishnu, which is considered the preserver, is linked to the superconscious, because it is only through the unification and integration of our conscious mind and our subconscious mind that we actually connect to the superconscious, which is what we would consider the transcendent or the numinous in our life. And this would be sattva, or the purest state. It's not that it's purity, that it's lack of darkness. It's not purity, that it's lack of sin or evil. I started off explaining that Purusha has all of those, except they're not differentiated. What the sattvic state of mind represents is I can see that which is conscious, that I have access to, and that which I believe to be the other, for instance, judgments or criticisms in another, and realize that they're just facets of myself that I have decided are other or separate, and bringing them in. And it is the unification of these three aspects that make us whole in our psyche. So the Mahagunas, the only form there is, and this is very important, is your mind. Nothing external exists. This world of spirituality, I'm not talking about the material world, I'm talking about the spiritual world that we construct from our psyche, from our thoughts. That is the only form that exists. So if this is at my table, or this is at my table, it is there through a thought, okay? And this people struggle with, and it's understandable, because people will say, well, what is this? Well, this is a combination of elements, and the elements are the archetypal sort of formation that turn into the world that you create. Now, we're more going to focus on situations and conflicts and problems, because that's really what people struggle with, not having a cup on their table. But so that we can extrapolate it out to form, thought is the form, and it's in your mind. So your circle is here, mental, okay? So great intelligence, mahad, buddhi, ahamkar, ego, all of this concept of your mind in Sankhya philosophy is related to form. The archetypes are form. Our individual consciousness becomes form. Our ego is form. Our soul is form. Our thoughts are form. Our wound, our victimhood, our story, which we'll talk about, is all here. This is the circle. So nothing materialized yet, but from here, all things in your life, problems, bank account, relationships, health issues emerge. And then we have choices, conflicts, what we call life happening. And it's rooted in the Mahagunas. If our choices are sattvic, they're balanced. It's unified consciousness. We've looked at the light, we've looked at the shadow. We've looked at both sides, that bottom of the triangle. Rajas is creation, conflict, power struggles. These are conscious things. I'm driving down the road, I press my brake on so I don't crash into the car in front of me. That is a choice that emerges from the Rajasic Mahaguna, the Rajasic mind. And then Shiva is all of that is unconscious, that destroys us, that emerges as problems and conflicts of a larger scale in our life. This is linked to our animal nature. We will talk about the Vahana and the animal nature when we get to the gods of Jyotish. So these three aspects of our mind are emerging from here, but they turn into the choices, the conflicts, and the life we live. Any questions about that? Okay. So just to recap. So this is a picture of a flower, and we see tamas at the roots. The tamas is our unchangeable nature. This is very important. It's not that tamas is bad. We need all three facets. We are all three facets of the mind. So if you've gone to yoga teacher training, or if you go to a space where they're talking about yoga or Ayurveda, they will oftentimes say, like, decrease tamas or diminish tamas or eliminate tamas. You cannot. Okay, and actually it is probably the most informative aspect of the mind for us to achieve change. Okay, so it's ruled by Shiva, as I mentioned. This is your desirous nature. It is below the ground. It's in the dirt. It's in the roots. This is what you come from. You cannot change your nature. There's a very common anecdote about the scorpion and the frog. And the frog wants a ride across, or the scorpion wants a ride across the pond. And the frog is like, no, you're going to sting me. And he's like, I promise I will not sting you. And indeed, when he crosses the pond, he stings the frog. And the frog is like, why did you do that? And he's like, because it is in my nature. What destroys us, what creates tamas in the mind is trying to change our nature, that which we are. We are animal, we are desirous creatures. And so this is viewed as bad, and it's not. It's roots. It's our level of consciousness from our family. It is the behaviors or the mandates that we were taught in our childhood home. We try to either do them the same or do them the exact different if we have a judgment around them, and they're not able to be changed. And so this is the part of our mind that we must accept. However, we don't typically accept it because it's below the surface, as the roots indicate, that we do not know what those things are. So we think we're stopping at the side of the road, donating to someone who broke down $50 so they can get their tire fixed. And really, we're just trying to cover up our desirous nature of greed, of envious, of pride. And so this is the key to really integrating all parts of our psyche so we can get as much reflection from Prakriti to Purusha is indeed Shiva. And if you're familiar with the god, Shiva has talked about the destroyer so that we can die and reborn and be reborn. This is the reason. We don't die to these things, but we shift the proportion because we bring them out of the darkness of the roots into the light so that we can become aware. So I bring you to that energy field. Everything that you create in your energy field, in your personal self, is you, created by your thoughts. But what about the other? What about the things outside of that field that you consider to be other because they're not in your boundary? That is the information that the other gives. It shows you your animal nature, your desirous nature, your unchangeable nature, so that you can indeed integrate it. That law is called the law of correspondence. As within, so without. So within, we're talking about this field. Without is everything outside of that field, and everything outside of that field, especially those things that bother you, are in your nature, but you haven't integrated or figured it out. So tamas is not bad, although sometimes it's sold as lazy and inertia and something to destroy. It's something to integrate, and it's the root, and it is actually what leads to sattva. So rajas is choice. It's the action. It's the conscious mind. It's what you know about yourself or what you think you know. It's ego driven. It's conscious mind driven. It has been anchored in a time and place. We are all choosing to be here this evening. That would be considered rajasic or rajas. And then when these go up, 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 we reach the guna of sattva. This is our true nature, where we balance our dark and our light or our choice. Things that are in the light, things that we're aware of and conscious of, and those that we are not. And this is the concept that brings us right back to Purusha. There was no differentiation. Here we have lines. There is no differentiation in the universal consciousness of what is tamasic, what is rajasic, and what is sattvic. So I oftentimes ask students, if the universal consciousness has no problem with its tamasic nature, why do you? if the universal consciousness has no problem with its desirous nature and animal tendencies, why do you? If the universal consciousness has no light and dark and right and wrong, why do you? The goal is obviously to bring that Prakriti reflection as close as possible, and it does require some diminishing of desires so that the light, the divine, can emerge, but not the negation of. And this is the core problem in spirituality, wanting to negate our tamasic, our desirous, and our animal nature. And you'll see shortly in the exact gods of Jyotish, in the exact gods that represent our archetypal energies in our psyche, every single one of them has what's called a vahana, an animal vehicle, because it is impossible to have a spiritual or a prakriti or a purusha through a prakriti without an animal vehicle that is desirous and unchangeable and tamasic. So this is a very, very important takeaway. This is not to be negated. This is not to be suppressed. This is not to be eliminated. But most spiritual traditions are misinterpreted to believe that to be so. So it is only through the integration of both, to understanding that our true nature, like Purusha, is a balance of all. Then within our flawed animalistic desirous form, can we then represent Vishnu, who's the preserver or the balancer in our psyche, the more sattvic tendencies. Any questions? This is a very important concept.
Francis, it's Jen.
Yes.
If you want to give breaks, we're kind of at a time where you might want to do that.
Okay, let me just finish this section and then we can take a break.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so now go back to your circle and add a triangle. So now you're the sphere of consciousness, everything that is you in that circle. And now add a triangle because those are your thoughts. So from that form, from that consciousness form, that energy boundary, now your thoughts are creating additional limitations and additional boundaries that will then become, and we'll continue building on this image, the life that you're creating. Any questions about that before we break? Okay, so I'd like to give a 5-minute break. So it's 8:24, so at 8:29, if that's okay. So now let's connect this to the state of evolution. If you remember, he who knows the Purusha, so the supreme consciousness, and Prakriti, that personal consciousness or individual consciousness, along with the divisions of the mind, the Mahagunas, whatever be his state of evolution, this is relating to the state of consciousness. He shall never be born again. So this is a space where we're all equal. We're all permitted equally to evolve, regardless of what we are born into, so to speak. So Anumanta is a Sanskrit word that means the consenter. And the idea is that our universal spirit and our individual spirit or consciousness have agreed to the process of evolutionary creation. So I just want to take you back to that moment of conception, that perceived separation of Purusha and Prakriti, that perceived separation where thought is established at conception, that perceived situation or idea that Purusha that's unmanifest and Prakriti that's manifest are joined. At that moment, and I think most of you have seen my karma class, or the element of fire is the only element that we are in control of. This is where this comes from. When we incarnate, we are choosing, we are in agreement to that creation. Creation is a word that is simultaneous with fire. And so we are not victims here. I have a client who will say, oh, I have this idea that I was like tricked into coming into this lifetime. And that thought forms her entire reality. And so we're not victims. We're not tricked. We have consented. The soul has consented to incarnate in this evolutionary state, whatever that is for each of us. So we have agreed to everything that has happened to us. Conception was that first initial agreement, if you will, and the follow through to birth was a choice. This is the element of fire. Fire is free will. Fire is choice. Fire is creation, and fire is what burns karma, and we'll talk about that. So in the Bhagavad Gita, for those of you who are not familiar, the Bhagavad Gita is part of the larger, the canon of the texts, is a story that takes place on a battlefield where Krishna is the Godhead and Arjuna is the human. And it's a dialogue between the divine and the material. And it takes place on a war zone. And Arjuna doesn't want to fight. Why? He doesn't want to fight because it's his family, his uncles are on the other side of the war. And the entire text is a dialogue of why Arjuna needs to fight, why that is his dharma. And like many spiritual texts, the war zone is our head. It's a metaphor for our head. And I'm just going to bring you back here for a moment. When he says he doesn't want to fight the family, what he's talking about is his tamasic nature, our roots, our consciousness that is inherited by choosing this incarnation, these parents, this family. So that's the premise of what the story is about. So we must fight to own our thoughts. Our thoughts are tamasic, they're subconscious, they're repressed, they're shadow. We project these onto the other, and we think that we're making choices. And 99% of our choices are made through the tamasic subconscious mind. So of course, there we see Shiva again as the destroyer, the one that destroys that tamasic nature so that it becomes awareness and then integration. But also, it's also what destroys our life if we look at it literally, because it's what creates the problems that we can't get out of our own way. So in order for us to understand our psyche, our mind, we have to understand choice, fire, conflict, creation, free will. These are all synonymous with that element of fire. And the first thing is that we are not victims, that we have decided and consented to this life, despite whatever the state of evolution is. So from chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, it says, if you will not fight this righteous war, then you will fail in your duty, lose your reputation, and incur sin. People will talk about your disgrace forever. To the honored, dishonor is worse than death. The fight is in your head. The fight is with your thoughts. The fight is within your sphere. It is not outside. It is inside. The battleground is inside. When we place fire, we go to the third chakra, the eye chakra, the self-worth chakra. It is directly linked to our psyche. So this is the war we came to fight. And it's very noble to want to be a social justice warrior. And it's very noble to want to create world peace. And it's very noble to want to help the environment. But we cannot help anyone if we don't take on first and foremost the war that exists in our own head, within ourselves. That is the goal. From there, we'll talk a little bit about service, then perhaps we can be of service to another. And so the metaphor of Arjuna not wanting to fight his family is indeed his tamasic nature, because it forces him to integrate and see things that he himself has chosen to incarnate with. So in the Rig Veda, they talk about 3 forms of fire. And fire is choice. And you guys have studied Agni, and these are different. We're going to talk about Surya as the sun god when we get to the planetary archetypes. It is the only element we have control over. It's what unifies the 3 aspects of mind, and it determines our state of evolution. When we are conceived, at that moment, when we choose to incarnate, we are choosing our state of evolution. We are choosing our consciousness level. We are choosing our life circumstances. Therefore, if you believe in karma, you cannot believe in concepts like guilt or spiritual differentiation. I'm not talking about earthly privileges and things like that. I'm talking about spiritual. In the psyche, we are all equal. Pain and pleasure. So one of the things that I say a lot is behavior doesn't matter, belief does. Behavior is actually the manifestation of your beliefs, of your thoughts, the ones you are choosing to either suppress or engage with. Prakriti is declared to be the cause of that which is to be done, the instrument and the doer. The Purusha is declared to be the cause in the experiencing of pain and pleasure. We're going to get deeper into pain and pleasure in a little while. Prakriti is the source of both action, so that behavior, and the instrument of action. But Purusha is the source of the internal experiences and internal reactions, our belief systems. Our experience of pleasure and pain that result from the movement of Prakriti. It is the attachment to thought. It is the attachment to those beliefs that then create a life that you deem pleasurable or painful. And we actually have an interplay of pain and pleasure to the point that we suffer through pain, believing that that is more divine, and we also can engage in desires and pleasurable thinking that that's painful. So there's an interplay between pain and pleasure, but we must understand that it is not the physical behavior, it is the thought that is sort of threaded through the behavior that is what you determine that if it's something that is pleasurable or painful, how you view it. So Rumi says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And he's talking about this Prakriti meeting Purusha. And so we have to begin with understanding that every single thing that we consider right and wrong is limitation. Every single belief we have is leading to a behavior that is limited. We are not whole. We are not congruent. We are fragmented. And that is the separation, that thought of illusion that we have between ourselves and others, right and wrong, and so forth, and judgments. Any questions so far?
I do have a question. Just as you mentioned how we aren't whole, aren't we the combination of the Purusha and the Prakriti making it whole?
Yes, but it's that's our potentiality. That's the promise. The promise of samsara ending, of no longer having to be reborn, is if we work through the thoughts that are limiting. If we integrate those thoughts so that we indeed can meet in that space. So the job of a lifetime is not what is implied in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Go fight a war, go make the world better. No, no, no. The job of a lifetime is the inner war, unification of those thoughts, so that indeed we can, let's say, vibrate at a higher vibration and stop coming back. So we have the potential, but we are not that. That is the potential of a lifetime, but we have to understand where we get stuck along the way. Great question. Did that help?
It did. It's kind of like why we're here. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
of this is why we're here, to raise consciousness. Yeah. That's why it's a slippery slope, because yes, there is obviously an earthly realm, right? We don't want to destroy the planet, and we want to take care of our body and all the container that is the form. But if we actually worked on our thoughts, we wouldn't have environmental problems. We wouldn't have, dirty water. We wouldn't have those problems if we individually, as Arjunas, took care of our thoughts. That's the irony. It's not externalization. It's about the internalization of these concepts, and the external world, your field, will change. And anybody who has gone through this process will say, my relationships have sort of emerged and changed and are different. Nothing has changed, but the inner state, the perception of the person has. It goes back to that adage, chop wood, get enlightened, chop wood. Enlightenment before and after looks exactly the same. And so it's all an internal process, but as a result, the external world changes because your internal thoughts are congruent. So that is the function of a lifetime, and many lifetimes, unfortunately. So let's talk about Jyotish, which is Vedic astrology. I do want to say a disclaimer. I am not a Vedic astrologer. I am a professional astrologer, but I am not a Vedic astrologer. I do use the nodes, which ironically we won't be talking about tonight, but I am a archetypal astrologer. And so it doesn't matter which archetypes you use, the archetypes are the archetypes are the archetypes. And when I mean about which archetypes you use, I'm specifically talking about which pantheon of gods. So in every type of astrology, it's the god figures that give the form to the archetype. So I use Aphrodite or Venus, and tonight we're going to talk about Shukra. It's the same. And you'll see I wrote them down for you. So Vedanga, Jyotish is part of that study of one of the limbs of the Vedas. There's 3 kinds. And the one particularly that most people, if you've gone to a Jyotish reader, what they're doing is Jataka, which is the natal horoscope. This also includes medical astrology, because your chart is basically what I call your psychological organs. So now from the Trimurti, we're emerging 7 archetypes. There's 9 Navagras, but 2 of them are the nodes, and we're not going to talk about those tonight. And so what we're doing is we're talking about the planets, the planetary placement on your chart. I will tell you, no matter what astrology you do, the picture of your astrological chart is a picture of your mind. That is the world you will create. Those are your fragments. That is the ideal, optimal image of who you are. So that's why astrology is such a prime self-realization tool, because beyond just so much knowledge that's carried in it, you can see a visual, a physical representation of what's going on and the world you will create. The thing is, you get choice. There is one thing that is not found in your astrology chart, and that is your level of consciousness, your state of evolution. Nobody can decide that for you. That is personal. And so it includes medical astrology, because in our belief system, things start from that energetic field, and eventually that thought materializes into your life, your conflicts. Well, it also materializes into your illnesses. So this is the limb that we're referring to when we talk about Jyotish. So the nakshatras are the lunar constellations. In the Shruta Samhita, it says that Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, so now we're talking about, again, the doshas, work along the same lines in the cosmos as the individual body. So now again, we start to see this idea of Purusha, Prakriti, the cosmic consciousness, materialize into you as your thoughts, your elements, your makeup, your doshas, your body. That will be not only your physical life, but also your constitution. So the Upanishads say that grahas are the senses. So now we're in the capacity to touch form, if you will, okay? And the senses are what they call the grasping ones. It's how we grasp life. First through our thoughts, right? Our elemental makeup, and then the desires that control us. So this starts to emerge when we look at an astrological chart. What placement in our charts are going to be malefic, difficulty, that we might engage in desires that are harmful, pain and pleasure that is harmful, versus the choice of how we use our senses, our faculties, our thoughts, our doshas, our elements, our life, our choices, to be more divine rather than desirous. Again, we cannot eliminate our tamasic, desirous animal nature, but it is a balance so that we can live more sattvic. So from the 3 Mahagunas, the 7 planets take form as life lessons. So the way that the universe, if you will, speaks to you or penetrates that sphere of consciousness is through these planetary influences. And we're going to connect tonight to the archetypes of the gods, because that's what you're connecting to, whether you know it or not. So the Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva, from there, those qualities, these 7 rays of the archetypal planets emerge. And these are situations and patterns that become your life. So, for instance, I grew up in a cult, and from leaving the cult, I met another cult leader, and I've had spiritual teacher after spiritual teacher until I became the spiritual teacher. That is a very evident thread of an archetype that I have, right? And so you're going to see your life manifest one primary archetype over and over and over. And I'm going to ask you tonight in your assignment to identify, of the 7 that I share, which one kind of taps into the one that most identifies with your pattern, so you could start to see. Even though there's one primary archetype, we are responsible for integrating all of them because they're not separate. And this is what we have to understand. They're all aspects of the mind. So Purusha to Prakriti to the Trimurti to the planetary archetypes, they're all one. Those archetypes become our life. And we say we have one life, one body, one, but this is proof that we're all fragmented. Our job is to unify and make them congruent so that all the situations and all the archetypes are consistently being addressed and integrated. What we get to do is choose our level of consciousness. That is our job. So there's 7 planets. They correspond to a god. We'll go through those, a chakra. And what's very important is that there is a light aspect and a shadow aspect to that god. Okay, so when I ask you to identify, and you'll see when we go through them, which one you most resonate with, the job is to also identify with the shadow aspect that could be some homework for you. These deities or these archetypes deliver karmic lessons. So in Hinduism, you see a lot of different temples to a lot of different gods. And again, it goes back to that idea of the Ishvadavatar, which god as form represents my qualities the most. For instance, mine is Hanuman. And so that is the archetype that I most identify with. But all of them are involved. I think there's some noise. So we want to identify which is the one that we most connect with so that we could see what archetype, what thought, what pattern, both light and dark, what desirous nature, what divine qualities are creating the life that we have, both with pleasure and with pain. So there's 7 veils and 1 self. So again, another division, another separation that appears to be separate. And again, it's an illusion. So the 7 that we're going to work with are the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn. So these are the primary planets, the primary 7 planets, no matter what astrological system you use. The gods we're going to work with for this pantheon is Surya, Chandra, Buddha, Mangala, Shukra, Brihaspati, and Shani. And they correlate to the planet. So if you're not into Jyotish, but you're into Western astrology, it doesn't matter, it translates. And some of the astrological systems only use the 7. In Jyotish, they use the nodes. The nodes are not gods, and they're nodes of the moon, and because this is a lunar system, but we're not going to use those. So we're just focusing on the 7 archetypes. So you have an identification with a specific thought form, with a specific archetypal pattern. That began at the moment of conception. When your parents conceive you and your spirit and your matter are suspended in that liminal space before you're incarnate and you've been kicked out of heaven, so to speak, that space creates the Prakriti that becomes your thought form, that then becomes that energy field, that then becomes your life. So the more we go up to that identification, we can realize why our life has a pattern and why we continuously find ourselves in the same situation that looks the same. The best way to see it is that relationships, right? You keep dating the same guy or girl, different face, but it's like the same person. Well, it's you. You are identifying with that archetype, with that level of consciousness, and that is what needs to be integrated. So again, there is no other. The separation is from your thought, from that moment you felt separated from Purusha, but not fully in a body and owned, let's say, by your parents. That space is the idea of a separation that does not exist. And it keeps you from your true nature, and it dictates your behavior. So your choices are linked to this specific archetype that is repetitive. And in Jungian psychology, we like to say, if the complex has you, you don't have the complex, or if the archetype has you, you don't have the archetype. And if you think of this as an energetic pattern that dominates your energy field, you're not in control of that boundary. You're not in control of that situation. If you keep repeating and repeating and repeating the same exact pattern, that complex or that archetype has you. And the reason is you have not integrated. So let's just stop here for a second. In that archetypal field or energetic field that has you, situations enter, people enter, and you think that they're separate. And they're not. That is the information from not only the law of mentalism that we're all one, but the law of correspondence, as within, so without, that we use to use the other, whether it's transcendent, ancestral, our relationships, to indicate what needs working on inside of ourselves. And so the illusion of separateness, the illusion that the other is harming us, the illusion that that judgment about their consciousness or their choices is just simply a reflection of self. And that archetype will continue, and that archetype will have you until you've integrated. The good news is there's 6 more that are going to follow, and then you'll have to do it all over again. But the key is to break that first initial one. It gets easier, so to speak, once we evolve from that. So this is Surya, our sun, which is our solar deity or solar principle. There's 8 other ones because the nodes are here and we're not looking at the nodes. So that's why the image has 9. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to cover the 7 deities. I need to reiterate, these are linked to the 7 original planets. If Hinduism or this form isn't what speaks to you, I have listed the traditional planet. You can go to the preferred. I'm a big Greek mythology person or Egyptian mythology person, and you can go to those mythological systems, those pantheons, and you're going to find the same exact qualities, characteristics, archetypes. Okay. So just to know that if there's someone as I go through, you're like, oh, but I really connect to Apollo, or I really connect to Aphrodite, know that there's a place for each of those. And we're just talking about the original planetary archetypes. There's obviously a ton that are iterations. So I want you to stop and think and write down things that you connect to, because now you're going to add another layer to your circle. So let's start with Surya. It represents the sun. He's the ruler of the planets. Our solar principle is directly related to our conscious mind and our rational masculine self. And it has to do with what leads our life, if indeed we integrate all of the archetypes. So he's got 7 horses, 1 for each. In full integration, we are living in our solar principle. We are on our throne, and it represents Vishnu. For the 7 tissues, it represents the asti, or the bones. And I put that for each, since you guys are doing Ayurveda, so you had that extra thing. One of the ways, and I mentioned that medical astrology, one of the ways that we can oftentimes talk about or connect to the one we have a problem with, because there's a shadow aspect, is understanding what layer of the tissues we have problems with. That's a little later. I don't know how detailed you're going to get into the tissues, but that's just another piece of information. And then I put the dosha as well. So look at the picture and see if something stands out. I'm going to give you that activity towards the end, but just as I'm talking, see if you can connect to the image and see if this is a deity that archetypally might resonate. Next is Chandra, which is the moon, also known as Soma. She represents the moon, the night, the vegetation. Now, I told you that each deity has what's called as a vahana. A vahana is an animal consort. So this confirms and reconfirms our tamasic nature, our animal nature, our desirous nature. One of the things I absolutely love about the Hindu pantheons is that vahanas are with every single god. They emphasize that there is an animal nature to our divinity, that exists. And we need to understand that so that then we can evolve. And that is really such a core thing that is missing in modern day sort of new age and spirituality, is this concept that we are dark, that we are desirous. So they really do such a beautiful job of incorporating an animal consort or a vahana in every one of their gods. She has the antelope. She rules the rakta tissue, or the blood, and vata. Next is Buddha, which is Mercury. It is our low consciousness nature. This is a tricky one because this is a trickster god. And as much as it is enlightenment and as much as it is high consciousness, it's actually a low consciousness in our animal nature that we're trying to defeat, and that leads us to raising consciousness. The consort is the lion. It is linked to rasa, or the plasma, and it's all doshas. All doshas need this integration of this archetype because it is consciousness, low consciousness, that as it rises can raise consciousness and stop the cycle of evolution. Mangala is Mars. Red, it's called the little red, or the little red planet. The animal is the ram, so we see this similarity in Western astrology. It's the maja tissue, or the bone marrow, and it is pitta. Shukra, we're going to talk about this at the end, but I want you to focus on this because it's an important concept, is Venus. It's the teacher of the demons. So make a note of that, especially if you identify with Venus, Aphrodite, Shukra, any of these sort of concepts of love. It's a very important concept, and we'll talk about it at the end. And so she's the teacher of the demons. And there's a reason for that, that in order to actually integrate and reproduce and give out love or service in this world, if we do indeed want to do our dharma after our integration of thoughts, we must educate our demons. And the demons, a tamasic nature, that desires nature. and this is the result. Her consort is the white horse. It is the shukra, or the reproductive tissue. So this is a very important concept. The teacher of the demons, demons having to do with tamasic, having to do with desires, having to do with our animal nature, is exactly what happens at reproduction. So in Ayurveda, the concept is that you prep the body, the mind, body, spirit for 2 years. That isn't the way that it works in the Western world. Most pregnancies are not even planned. And if they are planned, we surely don't plan for 2 years and eat properly and so forth. The idea is that the healthier the shukra is, which is the last portion of the 35 days of food consumption, that it would be cleaner and pure and healthier. But in reality, that isn't what happens. And so this moment when the desirous nature conceives the child, this is the start and the end, and you'll see that at the end of the lecture, of our spiritual path. It starts with the second chakra, which is desirous love, which is obviously the penetration during intercourse, and then the heart chakra, if and only if we integrate our archetypes. This is a very, very important concept. Brihaspati is Jupiter. It is the advisor to guru and to the gods. His consort is the elephant. The tissue is the meta, or the adipose, and it is linked to kapha. And so Jupiter, or Brihaspati, is the advisor to the gods, and the gurus is why, and these are named after the days of the week. Thursday is the day of the guru, because Jupiter comes from Jueves, which is Thursday. So we start to see how all of these traditions align. And so this is the God's day, the teacher's day, and it's because of the seeker, or the spiritual wisdom that the archetype has. If it helps, I can give you some of the more Jungian words to identify the archetypes, if that helps when we get to that activity, in case these are foreign to you. And then Shani, which is Saturn. Saturn is the greater malefic. He's either with a vulture or a buffalo, and it links to the mamsa, or the muscle tissue, and it's linked to vata. Saturn is the one that most people are afraid of, because it's karma, because it's difficulty, because there are limitations during that time of their life when they have those cycles. But some people really, really resonate. And so of the deities, I want you to think of which relates, either through the tissue, either through the dosha, either through the vahana. If you know something about the different days of the week and the planets, and whatever way you tonight connect, you can always revisit, because I'm going to add something to your little circle diagram so that you can continue your archetypal investigation. So I want you, within your circle and within your triangle, I now want you, you don't have to draw it, but write which of the archetypes you most resonate. I'm going to give you, just so that you have an additional layer for the sun, in case you're more familiar with the more traditional archetypes. You're looking at, the sun would be linked to the hero archetype. The moon would be linked to the caregiver archetype. Buddha or Mercury would be linked to the trickster archetype. Mangala or Mars is linked to the creator archetype. Shukra or Venus is linked to the lover archetype. There's 2 lovers, and it's both, but just write lover for now. Jupiter or Brihaspati is the seeker archetype, and Saturn or Shani is the sage archetype. If you want additional information, if afterwards, you know, with your instructor, whatever, you guys want a little bit more, I can give you some more additional information on the shadow aspects of archetypes so that you could start to identify the tamasic nature or the unconscious nature that's trying to emerge with your connection with the archetype, because that's really where the work lies. So you might connect to the seeker, but you don't realize that perhaps escapism is a big shadow aspect of it. And then what you consider, let's say, spiritual education is really just escapism. So you want to be able to have the light and the dark of that. And I can provide you some content on that. So now in your circle, in your triangle, write the planet or the god or the archetype, they're simultaneous, that you most resonate with. And there's no right or wrong answer. We'll see later on as you create your life a little bit more about it, but just for the purposes of the activity. So there's a few things that we're going to question about the archetype. Is it masculine or feminine? That's going to be one division of your psyche, and we're going to talk more about that. What is the element? Is it water? Is it fire? Is it earth? Is it air? Again, elements are masculine and feminine as well. We'll see that also with the doshas, right? Is there a light aspect that you really connect with, but is there a shadow that you reject? Some people connect deeply with the shadow and not the light because they're the devil of the story rather than the angel. And is the power of the archetype of the god more overt, like Mangala, which is Mars, very overt, or is it more mercurial, like Buddha, which is more covert, a trickster archetype, where they're more manipulative or, you know, underneath the radar? So now we're going to take this archetype, this deity, and we're going to define it even more with layers and layers and layers that then create your life. So people will say, oh, I'm working on my feminine, or I need to, I'm so masculine, and they don't really know the origins. This is the beginning of that, right? The thoughts are overt. The thoughts are maybe more rajasic. The thoughts are more masculine. And so now we're understanding that what we connect to is a lot of fire or a lot of overt aggression. And that now starts to describe the situations we find ourselves in. I'm always the aggressor. I'm always yelling. I'm always, you know, a leadership position. Well, there's a reason, because that archetype is now dictating that form of the thought has now going to create your behavior. But this is where the belief emerges. Any questions so far?
Do you think you can change archetypes throughout this lifetime?
The goal is to integrate all of them, but you have one overriding one. It's not set in stone, but I will tell you that it primarily links to your sun sign. So I'm Pisces, and in the 12 sort of Western zodiac, I use Neptune as the planet. It used to be Jupiter. Either way, I live out that archetype because it's the shadow is escapism. The innocent is the one who teaches these themes. So that's going to be my primary archetype. Most of the time when I work with clients, they may not be speaking from that archetype because they're working through a wound, but what's driving behavior 99.9% of the time, to not say 100, is the archetype linked to their sun sign. And one of the things I can share with you is a little chart that I have from my archetypes class. And if you're interested in this, I'm going to be teaching a very in-depth archetype class. It's phenomenal. I recommend it to everybody. Is the shadow aspect. So if I become more of that, I'm actually a better innocent. If I become more of this, I'm better a caregiver. And that's how we begin to balance that light and shadow with the tamasic nature and the rajasic nature. So the short answer is we're really driven by one, but the others are facets that need to be integrated in order for integration and wholeness. If not, we're not stopping any cycle of samsara, I'll tell you that. And even with that, I'm questioning that we could do that in one lifetime. So if you're most curious, I'd go to your sun sign and find that god, because that's probably the one that's calling most of the shots, the light side of it and the dark. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so abstract, remember, we're in thought, we're in form, abstract form, we're in archetype, we're still in this non-tangible, we know we have some senses that are grasping, but really we're still in this abstract. So how does this turn into our reality? Because that's really what we want to know. How do we change our life with this information? So your story. Your myth comes to life through your story. So we have, from conception and pregnancy and birth, sort of the manifestation of the thoughts, okay? We are materialized thoughts. Our body, our health issues, our archetypes, all of that is in unison. From 0 to 7, that's when our myth comes to life. You've got costumes and characters in a location, right? You have a religion, you have a culture, you live in a country, you have parents, you have a narrative. So now we're starting to see the archetypes in play. We're starting to see them take form as others, as self, as narrative, as victimhood, as the angel, as the devil. And now we start to get more tangible in why this archetype is leading the show. So it began at conception with that Purusha Prakriti, but it's materialized into the story you tell. So stop for a moment and identify the story you tell in just a sentence or two. One of my big stories is I was born in a cult. All I know is spirituality. That is that archetype that I was saying. I'm a Pisces. It matches up super perfectly, right? So even though I have to integrate all the others, that's the core archetype that I'm working from. The idea is to not attach to the limiting beliefs of the archetype, but rather integrate both the light and shadow, and remember that we committed to this lifetime, that we're not victims. That really is the key. If you want to first integrate your primary archetype that, like I said, most of the time is linked to your sun sign, all traces of victimhood have to be eliminated. That is the hardest task. That's the function of all of this teaching, is to get to a point to recognize that you are the creator of all of it. And when you get to that point, if and when that occurs, then there's hopes of integrating the others and perhaps a opportunity to stop reincarnation. So now we attach to the beliefs around the archetypes and we create a life. Our materialized archetype as thought becomes form, that not only is our body, our health, our dosha, but our situations, our conflicts. The way out of the attachment, because we are attached. When Buddha said the root of all suffering is attachment, he's talking about our thoughts. So you can give away all your money and you can live on the road. You're still attached because you've got a ton of thoughts, right? And so that's what we're tackling. It's not the externalization so much, but the thought that is creating that material world. And so the way out of the attachment to the archetype is to pull back the veil that is connected to. The veil is primarily the tamasic nature, the animal nature, the desirous nature. The words I use in my practice are the vices or the sins. In Ayurveda, there's a concept called the Shad Ripus. I don't know if you're going to cover it. That's more of an Ayurvedic psychology term, but it's the same thing. It's delusion, it's attachment, it's pride, it's envy, the same concept. Some people don't like the sin Christianity language. So there's vices, there's passions. That is the veil. That is the tamasic nature that needs to be sort of removed, that we're not capable of that nature in order to begin to work with the archetype, so that the archetype doesn't have us and we have the archetype, okay? So we want to go back to the sketch, the archetypal outline of the thought form. That's why I put this image. So this is Rama and Sita. If you've read their Mahabharata, the Rama and Sita are sort of the subject of it, and Sita's taken, and the whole story. I'm going to show you an image in a moment, and then we're going to put it together so you have an idea. Okay, so think of this archetype, right? Of marriage, of relationship, of love, of couples. Maybe it evokes Shukra, right? The goddess of love. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to start pulling back the specifics of your story, right? Who you married, when you married, what horrible divorce, the children you had, how much money you had. Those things are nonsense. They don't matter. Let's pull back that relationships are oftentimes for someone to meet our needs. We have expectations, we're disillusioned. What is the thought of the archetype? And notice if it's Shukra, when we're talking about love and relationships, that it's about desires, that it is about reproduction, that it's about the demons, right? The teacher of the demons. So that's what we want to connect to. We want to get in the habit of pulling away from the story, the costumes, the culture, the names, the people, because principle of mentalism says there is no other. Those are things trying to penetrate our energy field so they can be integrated. So that's the first step of working with the archetype. It's sort of erasing, sketching, taking out the color and the names and the definitives. Those are the things that have you. So one of the things I can share with you is when I have my conflict worksheet, where I ask clients to tell me their conflict in one sentence. The one sentence is exactly this. It removes all the, I don't want to hear about Johnny and Polly and if they stood you up and if you went to the bar and who got drunk. None of that matters. Conflict in one sentence gets you right to the heart of the archetype. And then you can start understanding why your life is the way it is and what you really think about yourself, your tamasic desire is animal nature that has created this continuous pattern that you live. So your belief becomes your behavior, not the other way around. Beliefs are what matters. Behavior does not matter. Eventually it will matter when we do choice. But if we're working with the tamasic nature, with Shiva, with the unconscious, with the archetype in control of us, we are not doing anything because we chose it. We are being led through the archetype. So you want to find the archetypal structure of your story. One of the ways to do that, like I said, the conflict statement, getting to the heart of the storyline, not the characters. Another way is to find the god that represents. So I'm just using this idea of Shiva, of Rama and Sita. So here is Rama and Sita colored in. Right now we have a story. A Mahabharata is this big. If we pull it back, it's about masculine and feminine, and one is on an island, and Hanuman has to fight them, and we start getting the sketch of the story, and you say that in a couple sentences. Our life is no different. We think it's this epic poem, and really it boils down to one sentence. That's the inner conflict and the inner archetype that we're fighting. So the abstract thoughts and archetypes become the reality, the colored in, the denseness, the divorce, the custody battle, the money, all of the nonsense of the story becomes what you focus on. In the Kabbalistic tradition, in one of the books called the Zohar, there's a great quote that says, every dream has a truth and a lie, and it's related to this. The truth is the root, the archetype, the belief. What do you think about a relationship and what it should be? For instance, man pays the bills, the woman stays home, whatever it is. And the lie is all of the concretization of your story, of the characters and the costumes and the names. And we get so focused on the lie, right? That's what you do when you tell your friends a story. They're supposed to help you bury the body, right? But when you come to someone like me, we go, heart of the matter. I don't want the story because it takes away from the truth. And one of the pillars of Ayurveda is truth. And this is what it's related to. So you can sleep all day long and you can eat well, but if this piece isn't addressed, the third pillar, it all falls apart. So you want to sketch the conflict from what was the original story, which I mean by the thought. How much of the story can be taken away so you can actually see the thought? Go to the conflict, one sentence. What's it about? That's the God, that's the archetype, that is the thought that you're struggling with. And the thought is tamasic. The thought is animal nature. The thought is desirous. I am envious, I'm gluttonous, I'm greedy, I'm prideful, I'm jealous, all of it. Do not think that the archetypal thought is anything but a tamasic thought. And I guarantee 99% of the time, your family said, hence the roots of the picture with the tree, that it was something said, don't do that here. We're not prideful in this family. We're not lazy in this family. And that's the origin. And that came from that moment of conception when supposedly Purusha and Prakriti separated. We go up, 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 it's there. We just don't know because we're not aware of our moment of conception. And then you get to choose. Do you want this to be something destructive? Do you want this to be something balanced? Do you want to fight this fight, right? And we'll see in a moment that you get to choose in situations, the covert, the overt, the pain, the pleasure, the masculine, the feminine. That's going to dictate what version of the archetype you're going, what face of the archetype you're going to put forth. So abstract archetypes and actuality. This is the sketch, is the archetype, and this is the conflict, the story, your life materialized. It's the same. If you can identify the pattern, then you know the archetype. But if you're so focused on what you want to see, that's your level of consciousness. And most of the time it's tamasic, in the sense that you're the victim, you're not the problem, it's not your nature, and it destroys you. Because obviously the good things don't create this level of incongruence and problem. So we color in the lines of the archetype. We call it life, we call it patterns, we call it problems, we call it people, and it's been us all along. This is the archetype, and it's one thought. And you can connect it, like I said, to the God, the light and the dark of an archetype of the planets. Any questions? Okay, up until this point, because now we're going into choice. Now we're going into what you are in control of. Up until now, you are in control of your archetype and your parents and your thoughts and all of that, but it's rooted in past lives. It's rooted in your previous evolutionary state. So we think we're victims. Now we're getting to the point where we actually have agency, known agency, Rajasic conscious mind agency. Any questions up until now? That was the main part of tonight. This is just kind of to follow it to the end so that you can make changes. Okay. So now we're at creation, choice, and free will. I said before, they're all element fire. They're all words for fire, okay? And this is how we burn karma. We cannot burn karma if we are acting tamasically, subconsciously, believing we're victims. There's when the archetype has us, there's no karma burning, and there's no good karma and bad karma. There's karma. Okay, it means action. Are we taking the action to burn it, or are we just kind of letting the archetype have us? Or we're just flowing with our tamasic nature and blaming the other? That's in essence what that refers to. So how do you change your reality, right? Since the mind is subtle, that's the first form, we have to identify the archetype. The archetype is not only a thought. The archetype is now attached to an emotional vibration. There's something in, I guess it's Jungian psychology. I don't know if it's like a known thing, but it's one of these things from Jungians that say hysterical means historical. So we like to throw around the words trigger. That's like a really big word these days. Okay, in spirituality, that's all this is. In any spiritual tradition, it is about what is happening externally and what is my choice that I'm going to respond with. That is in essence a trigger, okay? It has an emotional attachment. So now your archetype has a thought and it has an emotional attachment That emotional attachment has a vibration, and that circle that you live in, that you call your sphere of consciousness, vibrates at that emotional vibration. It's a low-level consciousness emotion. It's a triggering emotion. It makes you depressed. It makes you hopeless. It makes you paranoid. It makes you anxious. We use these words in everyday language because hysterical, just think of an emotional hysteria, is historical. And the historical comes from the moment of conception, that perceived separation of Purusha and Prakriti. Okay, so now we're back to that moment of conception. What happened in our moment of conception that is reenacted in every situation? Choice, the decider, the contender. We are going to get born. We are choosing this lifetime. We are choosing. So fire is the only element we are in control of, and that never, ever goes away. Too much emotion puts out your fire. You don't maybe choose correctly, like what Arjuna was trying to do, right? The emotion of the family. I don't want to fight the family. I don't want to do my dharma. And that's this nonsense that we're constantly in, okay? If we have earth, for instance, earth might contain our fire if we're fully embodied and not dissociated, and then we can use our fire appropriately. But fire is the element we are in control of. Fire is burning karma. Fire is choice. Fire is free will. Fire is the one that can burn, if you will, through the archetype so that the next and the next and the next can come. And it's that essence, that vibration that we're trying to connect to. It's known as the grace of God. We see it with the guru, right? The point of the guru is that you sit at the foot of the guru, and the guru illuminates you with his grace, with his vibration, with his essence. It's because he supposedly got to this point where the archetypes have been integrated. So we're making choices, either subconscious tamasic Shiva, or we're making conscious choices, more rajasic, only with our conscious mind. He cheated, I'm breaking up with him. That's it. No curiosity about anything else, right? That blatant, this is the way it is, right? And none of that exists. It's a link to a thought. And unless we get curious about our thought, then we're acting just subconsciously. Okay, so the choices create the life we're living. So now from the thought and the archetype materialized with the emotion, now we're in the body. Now we have a physical form, a physical home, a physical relationship, a physical child, a physical car, and all that physicality and all the conflicts associated with that relationship and that child and that job also are materialized. And they're all about choice. And unless we choose consciously, meaning bringing our tamasic nature and our rajasic nature to the forefront so that it can preserve and be of balance, and there's not always the same answer. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Then we're living a life of high consciousness, that perhaps we can integrate all the archetypes, that perhaps we can stop the cycle of samsara. So we've got Sattva mentioned Vishnu, Rajas is Brahma, and Tamas is Shiva. You can choose your values. You can choose consciously, subconsciously. That then means that all three aspects are in unison. Or you don't choose, it's choosing for you. The archetype has you, your desires, your animal nature, your tamasic nature, your emotional hysteria, which is the subconscious calling the shots. There is no karma burned when this is the choice. This is where we choose that we're going to integrate all of it, not only in our field of what's happening in our life, but that everything outside of that field that we call the other is really us, creation of our thoughts, and information for us to integrate. So the more karma we burn, the closer we get to that reflection of Purusha and Prakriti. the only way to burn karma, which is the only way to integrate the archetypes, which is the only way to be congruent, which is the only way that the archetypes don't own us, which is the only way to change our life, which is the only way to stop the cycle of samsara, is through choice. You choose according to your values. You don't always choose the same thing. And so I broke this into the parallels of the archetypes of the planets. First is the sun and moon. Are you choosing masculine or feminine action, a Surya or a Chandra? Which one is suitable for the situation? We don't go through this thought process, but this is the use of choice. This is the use of fire that then hopefully leads to the sattvic living of balance. Then Mercury and Mars, so the Buddha and the Mangala. Which power currency, and this is my language, are you using? Mercury is more covert. It's more of a trickster, right? Waiting and see, not speaking, pulling back, assessing. It could be a bit manipulative. It could be playing the field and the game as it needs to be. Or you're in Mars, you're in full-blown over, oh, hell no, that is not going to happen on my watch. I don't get XYZ, right? Really over aggressive. This is a big problem with spirituality these days. People think that authenticity is saying whatever they want, whenever they want it. That is not authenticity. That's being a bully. That's being aggressive in your overt nature all the time. There are times that what you have to say needs to be shut up. And that is the intelligence of the Buddha, which is linked to Mercury. So even though it's a trickster god, it's knowing what situation requires what response. So we don't do that because we're so emotionally driven. The hysteria is the history. We don't want that to happen to us again. We're being triggered. And this sort of waterfall of reactive responses. When spirituality 101, no matter the tradition, is not to react, but to respond. And this is how we respond. And then if we're looking at Jupiter and Venus, Brihaspati and Shukra, we're looking at, are we the gods or the demons? One was the guru of the gods and one is the guru of the demons. There is a reason. Some things are spiritual in nature and some things are earthly in nature. And this is another mishap that's being mistaught. So we need to live in the earthly world, which is part of the whole conundrum. Well, if everything is spiritual and everything is my illusion and everything is the principle of mentalism, people get very convoluted in this concept. There is a Purusha nature, but there is a Prakriti nature, an earthly form nature. They are related, but there are things that are earthly. So one of the things I'll hear, oh, I quit my job and the universe will provide. Oh, absolutely not. And one of the questions I ask is, does your earthly world support it? Does your Venus, does your desire support that? Can you pay the bills when you quit your job? Is it the right time to leave your marriage? So what is it that you want? You don't want to see your kids? You want to not have a life? Whatever the situation calls for. You have to understand, are you honoring the God, the guru, or are you honoring the demons and the desires? And both have a place. So these two right now are very convoluted in what people consider spiritual. This is the thought process to make a choice before you go out. And then Saturn is upaya. It's like a reconciliation, if you will. It's sort of like the turning of the clock. It's the god of time, where we constantly get the same situation, so we can show up differently, so we can make different choices, so we can think about it, so that after 15 times of saying yes, we finally say no, right? Setting boundaries and all that thing. So that's how the Saturn god, or Shani, assists us. It's kind of like the constant, try it again. And we live so many lifetimes in one lifetime, right? So we're constantly in this death rebirth cycle. And hopefully, if we start integrating the archetypes, we burn the karma associated with the limiting thinking and the emotional vibration, and we choose higher consciousness with each of these, then with the turning of of Saturn or Shani, of the chronological time, then divine time, when it's time to leave the physical form, can stop us from coming back. That's how those work. Any questions so far? So who tells your story? This is an important question when you're telling your story. What voice is telling your story? Is it masculine? Is it feminine? Is it overt power? Is it covert power? Is it plain? Is it pleasure? Is it desire? Is it divinity? Right? These are the circumstances that show up when we ask these questions, and we can start to see what archetype, what thought is making the life. So all pantheons are good for this. This is not just the Hindu pantheon. We did the main ones for the planets. The reason I like the Hindu ones is that the masculine has a feminine counterpart, and you don't find that in every single pantheon. So for instance, in Greek mythology, it's Zeus and Hera are like the primary male female figures, and then Zeus has all these escapades. So there tends to be at least one marriage, if you will, in the cosmos of the pantheon, but it doesn't mean that it's all put together. And these are kind of nice organized. So it's one of the reasons I like it. The other reason I like it is because the animals are reflected. Our animal desire is Vahana, tamasic nature. Now, each god in the pantheon represents certain powers, right? There's certain light aspects that they bring. So going back to the concept of the Ishvadavatar, God as form, you might resonate with one in particular because that's something that you need, some vibration that you need in your psyche to start helping you get out of your own way and not having the archetype have you. They do represent archetypes. They all have light and dark. Therefore, they represent integration. And we have to remember that each god in every pantheon has light and dark. And it is the integration of both. So if you resonate with one, find the light of it or the dark of it, because that's the balance for the superconscious, for the sattvic mind. So who is telling your story? When you identify an archetype, there's going to be a tendency, right? So the archetype might lean more masculine. It might lean more angel or divine. It might lean more high consciousness or low consciousness. The concept is both. Okay, so one of the nice things about the Hindu pantheon, when you have the male-female counterparts, you tend to see like a Shiva Shakti, where you see it's both aspects. So it helps us understand that these are pieces of a whole, and we need to address each. So in your story, are you more the masculine or the feminine? Are you more the overt power or the covert power? Are you the victim, the angel, the innocent, or are you the devil? You're the villain in the story. And there are many people where their story is they are the villain. This is the black sheep of the family. They're the ones that provoke the problem, right? That's the way they view themselves in that sphere. So of course, the angel needs to come in as the counterpart. Something I see a lot in practice with women, where they're like, oh, my husband is the best. And they put these people, it doesn't have to be a husband, it could be a child, it could be a boss, on a guru, on a pedestal. So now there's a hope that this devilish self, the archetype, can be redeemed because an angel enters and saves us. And that is detrimental, just like being an angel and an innocent and all young and sweet and innocent, that a devil obviously going to enter your story so that you can grow up and integrate. So either way is not healthy. So you'll listen to how you tell your story, through a masculine overt, through a feminine covert, through an animal devilish lens, or through an angel that needs a devil in the story, or a devil that needs to be saved by an angel in the story. And you'll see the characters in your life play these roles. Is it a high consciousness choice or a low consciousness choice? Now, it's not fair to say that the earthly is low consciousness and the divine or the spiritual is high consciousness, but that's the way we're itemizing it. So when I say here, desires or divinity, that's what I'm talking about. Is it pain or is it pleasure? Why do I use those words, and why did I bring that in from the text? Because those words tend to relate. Divine choices have more to do with the spiritual, using our senses, those grahas, with divinity. We're connecting to source, whereas desires are using our senses to self-destruct. We need both. People that attempt to live in the divine and the light and the spiritual all the time are so dissociated and imbalanced as those that are pleasure seeking. And why is it pain? Because we have a belief that suffer now, get rewarded later kind of thing. And so that's why we need balancing of it. That's why we need both the teacher of the gods and the teacher of the demons. We need to use desires and senses for desire and pleasure. We need to eat, we need to have sex, we have to sleep, and we have to have, some earthly pleasures as much as we have divinity, which is our contemplation and our connection to source and our meditation and whatnot. Okay, so this is the issue of balance here, but a lot of these concepts have been misconstrued. So the low consciousness, we're talking more about the body and the material needs, whereas high consciousness choices are being linked to more of the spiritual needs. And it may not be fair the way that they're kind of designated, but that's the indicator, right? That the desirous nature is going to be more destructive, more tamasic. Your initial conditions, which I mentioned before, when you're that sort of sphere is created, is oftentimes, most of the time, if not all the time, going to choose. It's going to choose you. Because what you're trying to do is go back to that moment of conception, that archetype, that thought, the limiting belief. And then the 0 to 7 story your parents tell you, or society tells you, or your school teacher tells you, or your friends tell you, that's not okay, that's bad, put that away, we like that. And we start living out this prophecy. We start people pleasing, we start our codependence, these themes that we all seem to struggle with. And it's all for fear of rejection and fear of abandonment and fear of going back to that liminal space at conception when nobody owned us, when no one even knew we existed. We didn't know where we belonged. And this is what starts to decide our choices. Oh, I should save someone on the side of the road and give them money because I learned, and this is all split seconds. It's not that we're logically stopping and thinking about it, because I was told that greed is bad and I have too much money and I just got a raise today. And then we stop and we give someone $50 on the side of the road, and we didn't stop to think why and go through the curiosity and the questioning. So mind becomes matter. This symbol, if you're not familiar with it, is called the Sri Yantra. It is a Hindu and a Buddhist representation of how the universe was created from Hirabindi, a thought that, or the origins, right? When that Purusha and Prakriti separate, the triangles are the thoughts and the 4 directions are the materialization. This is the same thing with us. We have this one limiting thought, oh, pride is bad, greed is bad, whatever the limiting thought is, lust is bad. We then create the world, our health, our body, our bank account linked to that materialization of that thought all the way into matter, including our conflicts. So again, the questions are you choosing a masculine or a feminine response? A covert or an overt response? Your desire or low consciousness over your divinity, high consciousness? And then Saturn is sort of the fate that just kind of keeps giving you those situations. I can't remember if it was Jung or Campbell that said, I think it was Jung, that said until we make the unconscious conscious, we call it fate. It keeps coming back and we keep calling it fate. So it's like, oh, I keep dating the same guy. I keep getting the same boss. I keep struggling with the same addiction. It's because the tamasic nature or the unconscious has not brought it to light, and then we call it fate. And Saturn has its way of knocking on our biological clock and our chronological clock every 7 years, and lo and behold, the same problem arises, so that we can now hopefully choose. And then it's a remedy and a unity, like a rectification, so that we have an opportunity to be congruent and whole. Any questions so far? We're wrapping up soon.
Could you repeat that last quote?
If we fail to make the unconscious conscious, we call it fate. And that's a modification of the larger quote. I can't remember the specifics. And so the idea is that whatever's unconscious, whatever's tamasic, desirous in our nature, animalistic, continues to enter your sphere of consciousness. And you're like, oh, it's fate. Oh, it's destiny. Oh, the universe. No, it's you. And it's linked to a limiting thought, to the archetype, to the shadow part of the archetype. That's why we focus so much on the tamasic, on Shiva as the destroyer, so we could destroy the illusion that we are not that, right? When we judge someone, oh, I'm not that. No, no, no. Shiva not only says, well, the destroyer will destroy your life if you don't make this conscious, but it's also what the destruction of the illusion that needs to be destroyed, so you can realize there is no other. So life happens for you. And I know people say this, but it is the truth. And these fate, if you will, situations emerge so that we can integrate the light and the shadow aspects and live as integrated whole beings. So conflicts are life situations, right? We say life happens. Oh, when life was happening and I had kids and I had this and I had that. Life is the battleground. Life is where the thoughts and the archetypes, where Arjuna goes to see what he's made of, right? And so this is directly linked to karma, directly linked to choices. If we don't live life, if we don't have conflict, if we don't create conflict, if we don't sort of participate in the battleground, then we do not know what we're made of. We surely cannot burn karma, and we just don't know how we'll choose. And so I'm sure you've covered the 4 stages of life. When you move into, you get out of artava and kama, and you move into the ashram, right? Into the opportunity for moksha. What do? You give up sort of your earthly possessions, and now you start working on your soul. Well, we have become a society of escape artists. And one of my favorite philosophers is Gurdjieff. And he was Armenian, and he had something called the 4th way. And he's like, it's not the way of the Buddha, and it's not the way of the fakir. It's not in the monastery. It's not in the ashram. It's in traffic. It's in your workplace. It's in your home. It's in your life. And if we do not put ourselves, I think it was Carlos Castaneda who called it the petty tyrant. If you don't put yourself in the line of fire with the petty tyrant, Krishna telling Arjuna to fight his family, you don't know what you're made of, and you're surely not going to burn karma. So this idea of retreat hopping and ashram living, and I'm talking about people that are like hiding out in life. I'm not talking about little things here and there, right? Those are respites. Those are the modern day respites. But people that just really don't, oh, I don't confront, or everything's light, or I don't make choices, or I don't watch the news. The nonsense of not living in the world doesn't allow for us to have externalized conflicts. The conflicts will be internalized, and we'll just get sick, right? And we'll just eat ourselves alive. But the purpose of being externalized with conflicts is to see what we're made of, to see what we will choose. Are we going to choose masculine, feminine, overt, covert, pleasure, pain, divine, desirous? What are you going to choose? And so when we judge others, oh, I would never. Be sure you would, you know? And so that is the opportunity that conflict gives us. And again, conflict is karma, is free will, is choice, is fire. And so we need these to see if we will indeed choose higher consciousness. Higher consciousness is not always related to spirit. It's about going through the checklist and choosing what's best for that situation, even if it's an earthly, aggressive, whatever outburst you have. So do you choose what life destroys you, or do you choose what life affirms? One of the things I see in practice is this life destruction all the time. People will come and they're going in contrast to their desires, animal nature. It's like, are you kidding me? That is going to kill you if you put out that fire. And we know Agni, right? It all comes from the choice. It all comes from the Rig Veda. This is not the fire in your body. It's the fire that can metabolize thoughts that are impure, thoughts that your desires, thoughts that you are not all light and love. That's why fire is so important. And so people will come and go, oh no, I can't do that because that's against the light. And it is killing them because that's exactly their essence and their nature, and they don't want to put it out there. So that kills our fire. So if it's destroying you, then that isn't the greatest choice, right? It's the finding the balance, that you don't go overboard with the desirous nature, but you find a balance. Is it life affirming? If it's life affirming, then it's likely that it's supporting in your fire. Is it linked to your dharma? Another thing that's all new agey these days, like, oh, this relationship or this marriage or this job or this whatever, it's so low vibration for me. No, you committed to something, you follow it through. Like, that's your dharma at the time. Let's say motherhood, right? That is your dharma. And so we want to attach all of these beliefs of spirituality and high consciousness and the universe. No, that was the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Your dharma, besides being the mental battleground of fighting the family, meaning his lower consciousness and his tamasic nature, was also that you're a warrior. He was a warrior in a warrior caste. He had to fight. And so we need to know what we committed to and honor what we've signed up for. If not, it will become life destroying. I mean, in my practice, I can pinpoint when someone self-betrays to the moment, that the hourly frame of when they will self-destruct as a result of not honoring their own value systems. If you do not fight your war, which is ultimately your own demons in your tamasic nature, you will never be able to find out if you'll choose correctly. Correctly doesn't exist. There's no list right, wrong. Remember, Purusha has all things in it. But linked to your archetype, there is a light side to that archetype. And so will you choose in honor of that, or will you choose to betray and self-destruct? Hiding out, escapism, that kind of thing. Oh, I'm love and light. I never get angry, all the nonsense. I never have a thought that's bad. I don't judge. Ridiculousness confirms that you're good. But if you don't put yourself in the line of fire to destroy yourself, you'll never know if you'll choose to preserve yourself or destroy yourself. So let me elaborate on that a bit. In that 0 to 7, when you get your narrative and your story and your characters, you were very much punished or wounded or traumatized, right? Something happened in those 0 to 7 years. Even if the biggie happened in your adult life or teen years, some people get raped at college, or a severe car accident that leaves them paralyzed, things like that. Really, if you backtrack it, it comes from the moment of conception, but the thought and the mandate and the we don't do that in this house comes from the 0 to 7 years, whether it's spoken or unspoken. So when I say put yourself in the line of fire, put yourself out there, own your desirous nature, and do exactly that. If you struggle with lust, for instance, I had a client the other day, and she wants to open like a sex palace thing to teach women sexuality and couples to go and play, and she was judging it. It is a life destroying because she was said, put that away, that's wrong. Her trauma was like at 5 years old at a birthday party, and her dad yelled at her. So she understood lust is bad, sex is bad, relationships, outside of maybe marriage, whatever her thought was, are bad, right? They're desirous. So by hiding out, not opening the palace and not teaching sexuality and not, because I am not that. First of all the scenarios that appear in your circle, in your sphere of consciousness, are going to be related to that archetype, every single one of them. And you're going to be like, why does this theme show up? Oh, I'm meant to help these people. No, they're there to help you. And so that archetype is going to show itself like in every different possible way. That's why understanding all the facets of the god or the archetype is important. And so that particular week, I said, we were talking about service. She goes, oh, I'm here to be in the light and serve. And I'm like, well, what's your definition of service? And she's like, oh, well, this week alone, I had 2 people that tried to commit suicide. Suicide is the same archetype as sex. It's the magician and it's hermetic. And in Western astrology is Pluto. And so I said, you weren't there to serve them. They were there to serve you. And until you put yourself in the line of fire and live out your desire in a healthy way, the idea is that your limiting belief, your thought, your archetype, you manifest it in a healthy, contained way, not that it destroys you. Then you're just hiding out. And that's what we're finding people doing more and more now. And so a lot of these illnesses, these gut issues, that is all Agni, that is all fire, that is all choice, is not wanting to put themselves in the line of fire for hopes of killing their tamasic nature, for hopes of only being sattvic, for hopes of not having to do that because I was told that was wrong. And that thought is dictating their life. And it's not life affirming, it's life destroying. Any questions on that? That's an important concept. So unified consciousness, you are all 3. You own your tamasic nature and you integrate it. You choose with your rajasic nature. And of course, it depends what part needs to be chosen. And as a result, your mind sort of is unified consciousness with your sattva and your preservation of self. You don't destroy yourself and you don't, just go into the war zone all the time, but you're choosing appropriately. You choose pain and pleasure. You choose masculine and feminine. You choose overt or covert. You choose day in and day out your choices. Those choices create your life. And they all go back to the original thought. They all go back to that original archetype. The other archetypes that enter your consciousness are in support of that. So now you draw a square. So you've got your energy field, your prakriti, you've got your thought, your limiting thought, you've got your archetype, and now the square represents your earthly life, your conflicts, your situation, your health, anything that now is palpable, that has the elements that you can see and touch. And so your life, all of these work down to that this square, this life is honoring all the unison of that archetype, the light, the dark, all of it. And that's the life that we're living. And so you could strip all of this back and get to that. So how to change your life? Well, your thoughts. So you begin with a thought. It's attached to an archetype. And remember, that's like a complex. That's like the thought with the emotion, your hysterical, historical, that kind of thing. It has an image. It could be the god. It could be another image. If let's say you're a chef, it could be food, right? Food could be the archetype. I just taught a class on the archetype of water, right? So of water and ocean, and that's the imagery that you connect to. It's not just limited to the gods, but those are the easiest to understand because of all the teachings. The image conjures up an idea that you have been taught that is limiting. That is the veil. That is the illusion of separation. That thought at that Purusha Prakriti moment, that thought there is, we don't do that in this house. We are not that, right? And you are that. And the universe consistently shows you that you are that by bringing things in as the other. This leads to the conflict. So the conflict is a materialization of the idea that is linked to the image, that is linked to the archetype that started with the thought. And that conflict, if you could pull it back, allows you to ask the questions. Which God are you going to sort of integrate or become, or which version of the face are you going to show up with? High consciousness, low consciousness. What is the limiting belief you were taught about the conflict? So for instance, this client who was having trouble with her sex business, there was a limiting belief about sexuality in her home. So it would make sense that she would deem it bad and not of the light and want to stay away from that line of fire. What can you destroy? What can you kill or integrate from the shadow, bring to the light, so that the creator and the preserver can emerge? So whatever is that unconscious, and the archetype and your surrounding conflicts and the people in your story are going to constantly show you the archetypes that need to be integrated. The first one is the hardest. That's like a shattering of all things victimhood, and the others find their way a little bit easier. Not everyone takes the challenge. Most of us will do enough work to get out of pain. And so if you're not in a lot of pain, you're probably not going to work that hard. And that's just the way it is. If life becomes so unbearable and the veils and the delusion are so shattered, then there's more of a likelihood of going deeper and deeper and deeper, but it's not typical. So your thoughts are linked to an archetype, which is an image. Now we're talking about the goddess form, the Ishvadavatar. The idea, this is really crucial. What were you taught about that? That will create the conflict, which could be a life problem and or an illness as it materializes in the body. And what are you going to choose? How are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to integrate? Are you going to choose your dharma? Are you going to choose to be overt? Are you going to choose to be covert? Are you going to do what you always do? Are you going to hide out? That is the key of how thoughts turn into life and how you change your life. So conflicts to consciousness. If you choose, you lose. Bottom line. This life is limited. You are limited by your thoughts, you're limited by your emotions, you're limited by your body. There is no such thing in this realm as the entirety of. The closest we can get is that our prakriti, our integration of our archetypes and our thoughts, are as close a reflection to Purusha that we don't judge good and bad, light and dark, but we have to have limited beliefs about things. We just try to learn to open up the space so that the thought is not as restricting, not as limiting. That this isn't bad, but rather situational. This isn't good, but rather in this situation, it's better to be overt. It's better to be feminine. It's better to, and that situation decides which one of all of the Purusha qualities I'm going to put forth for that limited situation. And so you have an inevitability of choice. Not choosing is choosing. Not choosing is subconscious, tamasic. Not choosing is not burning karma. It's still choosing. You're just being a victim and you're not using your free will. So by choice, you are already limited. And that's the work. The work is to go through the layers to decide what is the best choice for this particular conflict. So start with your concrete reality. What are the conditions of your particular story? You know, was there abuse? Was there abandonment, neglect? Those type of things are going to inform. This is the key. Get into your destructive animal nature. Know, like the scorpion, it's in your nature. Know your nature. Your God, the one you're most attached to, will tell you your nature. Your story will tell you your nature. What you were taught in childhood will tell you your nature. That is your nature. And knowing that will never lead you astray. But ignoring it will destroy you. There's a reason that it's Thomas and it's the destroyer. And the worst thing about not knowing your animal nature is that situations that are life-shattering will enter to show you who you really are. The world is not going to be kind to you. And then what's unconscious that needs integrated, which is linked to this, and asking the questions of which is the choice here, masculine, feminine, overt, covert, pain, pleasure, low consciousness, high consciousness. Then you choose, and yes, it's limited, but maybe in the next situation, it's something different. And then your life starts to change. So pick a new archetype. Once you've integrated the first, now go back to that image and pick a new one. So I put Shukra here, as I mentioned, that you start all over again, over and over and over. I don't know if I have in this document. Oh, I'll get to that. It's in the next slide. So put a new archetype, and then it's the same thing. Find the light, the dark, the thought, what resonates, what you reject, all of that integration, and then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And that's the process of life. That's the process of not letting our state of evolution determine whether or not we get to reincarnate or not. Any questions? Okay, I've got about 4 minutes left.
I'm curious of the initial thought. Do you, like you say, that comes from conception? Do you feel that that initial thought is karmic or influenced by our parents' energy of creating us?
That's the same answer. So when we incarnate, that emotional vibration that I mentioned, the hysterical is historical, that thought is actually linked to an emotional vibration. That emotional vibration is how you choose, how that a contender chooses the parents. So you're choosing two things and they're related, they're integrated. You're choosing a thought that is linked to an emotional vibration, that is linked to your past karma and is linked to your present day desirous tamasic nature, and your parents are simply the vehicle to bring you in. So you get, at the moment of conception, what your parents are thinking, I'm just going to be kind of silly right now. Your dad got fired that day and your mom and him are having sex and he's like, I'm such a loser, I can't hold a job. Okay, so that thought becomes you. And now your tamasic nature is to be lazy. He can't hold a job, is lazy, or a workaholic, same thing. So now your whole archetype is about Shani, Saturn, work and work and work and work and work. And when you start stripping back that thought that has an emotional vibration, let's say shame, let's say hopelessness, they're linked. So a lot of deeper inner work starts to reveal that. That's obviously the process of keeping, removing the veils and going deeper into ourselves. But that's the beginning. The beginning is the thought and the emotion are together, and that's what's creating that sphere of consciousness. And then the archetype is in relationship to that. It's responding to that. That's why I said what each of the gods were about. Does that make sense?
A little bit, yeah, I'm digesting it.
So you pick your parent on a vibration. The vibration is linked to the limiting thought and the limiting emotion. They're together. And that is considered low-level consciousness, tamasic nature. That's why it's unchangeable. All you can do is accept it and integrate it. So myths is mandalas. You can, to start kind of getting into what's conjured up, what emotional things. Obviously, these beings are very light in nature. They're beautiful. The symbols are a lot of sacred geometry and so forth, but there are dark counterparts. There are many mythological characters, and Hinduism has a ton of characters. So you could start to kind of meditate on the mandalas and see what stands out. What repulsed you? What didn't you like? Did you not like Kali's tongue that's all out, right? Did you not like not recognizing if Shiva is male or female? When you see more of the images of Shiva Shakti, like you don't know, that's the intention, right? What repulsed you? What bothered you? What didn't sit well with you? That is information of what needs to get integrated. What aspects did you really like? You can work on growing those lighter aspects and diminishing some of the darker aspects associated. Stay with the symbol. And it doesn't only have to be mandalas and gods. Any symbol that you're working with, symbols come from the collective unconscious, and it's part of that universal consciousness. What don't you like about the symbol, or where does it affect you in the body? Stay with it, because archetypes and symbols are related in that collective unconscious. If you're working with symbols like the Sri Yantra, what's the meaning of it? Where if there's a symbol, and it doesn't have to be something symbolic like sacred geometry, it could be a car crash, that could be overt power gone wrong, mangala, and destructive fire. Where is that symbol represented in your life? Find the god, for instance, a car, mangala, fire, find that and see what story conjures up, because there's information in that wound, in that trauma. And then there's a concept called squaring the circle. So our logo for the school is the squared circle, which is right here. It's a very metaphysical, alchemical symbol. And it does exist, the same concept in, actually, I don't remember if it was the Upanishads, but the first answer, squaring the circle, actually is found in the Hindu text. Even though it was presented by Greek mathematicians, the answer is found in the Hindu text. And the idea is of integrating mind, body, spirit. And so that's why I had you kind of build. So this little guy in here is what I call my personal spiritual adulting archetype map. These are the glyphs of the gods. So here's Surya and Chandra and Buddha and Mangala, and you can use any pantheon. I just happen to use the Greek gods. And they kind of tell a story in terms of asking questions. So here at the bottom would be the sun and the moon, masculine and feminine. Here would be Mercury and Mars, which would be overt or covert power. Here, Jupiter and Venus would be pain or pleasure. Uranus and Saturn, and I'm looking at more than the 7 original planets in my particular map. You don't have to do this, but would be chaos and structure. And then there's Pluto and Neptune, which are you the angel or the devil of the story? And then Chiron and Black Moon Lilith, which are not planets, but they're asteroids. Are you the wound? Are you the wounded? Or are you the ruler of the wound? Is the wound ruling you, or are you ruling your wound? And that's how I work with clients. And it's just a metaphor. And you can put any gods in there. I will tell you, the final, okay? So when you get up the sort of archetypal ladder and you work through all of these archetypes, you must return back to the form. This is something that's very tricky in our day and age. People want to stay in this mystical space. They want to stay attached to their mental health issues. They think that hiding out in these spiritual communities, that is not the end of the journey. The end of the journey, which brings me to Shukra. The reason that she is the goddess of reproduction of the Shukra Dhatu, and she is love, that she is service, that she is a will, is that after we've integrated all of those archetypes, we must return back to the form. And so I put her here because she's the last one. And you can find anyone. I use Aphrodite or Venus because I work mainly with the Greeks. So the will allows you to create your new you. And what happens is when you start integrating these archetypes, the will allows the soul to lead the show. So now you're soul purpose driven, right? Rather than ego driven. So that's the first part. Love is all that's left. After all of this has been removed, love is all there is. No one's there yet. This idea of love is the answer and love and love and love and I'm fighting for people. No, that is not true. No one has even owned their desirous nature, their second chakra, desirous nature, where she's teacher to the demons, where she's about pleasure. We don't own that part of us. Nobody has an open heart chakra. That's nonsense, right? So we turn desirous love, owning our tamasic nature, not letting it destroy us, but rather learning to choose sometimes desire, sometimes divine, sometimes pain, sometimes pleasure, that balancing act. Then we can move up to our third chakra, which is fire, choice, self-love, and self-worth. Then and only then, right? So we see tamas, we see raja, second chakra, third chakra. Then and only then, and that's a long, long road. And if then we can get to our sattvic nature that lands right back to this goddess, and then we see reproduction. The reproduction, or the shukra dhatu, not only is about passing on our new vibration, hence why 2 years in Ayurveda we prep the body, and we try to have all the healthy dhatus and everything, is that you're trying to move forward consciousness, right? I've integrated this, and now I'm going to move forward in consciousness with service. This chakra, the end point, if you will, is service. You cannot be of service if you do not have desirous love and your tamasic nature under wraps, and if you do not have your Agni or your third chakra under wraps. If your tamasic and your rajasic nature are out of balance, and I'm not only talking about the body, I'm obviously talking about your psyche. And these archetypes are there, and you can't open your sex palace, and you can't eat something, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, because all these limiting thoughts are riddling. Then you haven't owned your desirous tamasic nature. You surely do not have a strong Agni to metabolize the limiting thoughts in which you're conceived and creating your life. There is no shukra dhatu. There is no, the shukra has to do with the masculine and the feminine. There's no balance. There's no right, wrong, left, masculine, feminine, Shiva, Shakti. And so that's why it's so important that we go up our chakra in order to eventually be of service. And service is first self, third chakra. You cannot be of service and have a fourth chakra if your second and your third chakras are out of balance. So what happens is your desirous nature, your hell, right? That thing that you're addicted to, those thoughts that you're addicted to, that conflict you're addicted to, because we are addicted to our pain and our suffering and our attachments, becomes the exact service that you give to others that share in your same desirous nature. And so now we're right back to your shukra dhatu. You serve because you know your second chakra is desirous. You serve through your heart what wisdom you've gained and what balance you've achieved because you've understood your tamasic nature of sex, desire, and creation, and all the types of loves that are found in the second, third, and fourth chakra. So one of the things that you can do, you can meditate on the God. You can also do the mantras. The bij means seed, and you can do a seed mantra or bij mantra for each of the gods. I have those there. That can start to help removing the veils. I do a chant every morning. I've been doing for maybe 15 years of the Hanuman Chalisa. And even though that isn't the only practice, something happens vibrationally that the syllables, these mantras that are stored in our vibrational sort of energy body start to move things. So it's not the only thing. You have to have consciousness, but these are very good tools to start to raise the vibration and become aware of your tamasic nature. Your doshas are now biological energies for the physical and the mental, right? So it's the trickle down of the materialization of the thoughts. And if you are easier with the elements, if it's easier for you to understand the dosha, right? The light and the dark of kapha or pitta, then go that way, start that way. And something I learned in India is eat for your thoughts. I was in India and I was doing great. And one day we engaged in some panchakarma tradition, and my body did not work. And in dialogue with the doctor, I wasn't eating for my gut. I was eating for my gut, but not for my thoughts. You have to feed your thoughts. You have to eat for the dosha of your head. And they are obviously gut brain related. But go to the thoughts. Are the thoughts very slow? Are the thoughts very fast? Are the thoughts heavy? Are the thoughts light? Are the thoughts escape? That's the food, if you will, to start bringing in the thoughts and connecting that to the body so that the third chakra and the Agni can get stronger. There was one more thing I wanted to say, but I can't remember. Oh, I remember. So this is Hanuman. And Hanuman is my god of choice. And he is the god that can expand his thoughts, make them small, make them big. It's all about consciousness. He's linked to the Buddha or the Mercury god that I mentioned. And for some reason, I've always been attracted to him. I didn't know anything about anything. And I go to India, and the little astrologer that was like 4'7" walks in and goes, Hanuman mind, Hanuman mind, Hanuman mind. And that's all he said. And then the doctors kind of explained, look at these images and see what you're attracted to. Listen to the mantras, connect with them. They're going to speak to you. They're going to tell you. And that 15 plus years of listening to that chant every single morning, at least an hour. And that isn't all of it. That's a big part of it. So I'll never take away from the shadow work and the integration of consciousness, but the traditions of the Vedas are just really powerful. And when you work all of the parts, they really help you. So thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, I took a little extra time. Sorry about that. Yes, Bella, you had a question?
It's not a question. I just wanted to say that like that was so well explained, and like most of the questions I had throughout it, like you had such a good like wraparound. So that was really awesome. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Jen, anything else?
I don't think so. Is everybody feels like they have their questions answered? Here, you want to stop the share, Francis, so we can see the people.
There's any questions? And if something comes up after, you can always ask your teacher and I'll answer.
Yeah, I'll text you during class and you'll answer.
Questions.
Exactly.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying her as much as she's enjoying you. She can't say enough about each of you and the class. So thank you for letting me take up more than the time. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you. I'm just going to close up. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Good night.